When 4 wounded men faced 600 miles of open ocean in a crippled warship, what possible hope did they have? The odds were not just against them, they were mathematically absurd. Yet, in the closing days of the Second World War in the Pacific, this exact scenario unfolded not as a myth, but as a documented, incredible feat of seamanship and sheer will. This is the story of the USS Houston, a Cleveland-class light cruiser, her decimated crew, and a voyage that defied every expectation. Our story begins on October 14, 1944. Off the coast of Formosa, present-day Taiwan, the USS Houston, CL-81, part of Task Force 38, was providing critical anti-aircraft screening for the fleet's carriers. She was a modern warrior, over 600 feet long, displacing 10,000 tons, and bristling with a dozen 6-inch guns. Her crew, under the command of Captain William H. Behrens, was seasoned by months of Pacific combat. But on this day, the Japanese launched a massive aerial counterattack. Among the swarm of enemy aircraft were torpedo bombers, their pilots trained for one lethal maneuver. The Houston was struck not once, but twice by aerial torpedoes on her starboard side. The damage was catastrophic. The hits flooded engineering spaces, killed power, and induced a severe 17-degree list. Over 200 officers and men were killed or wounded in the initial blasts. Seawater rushed in, threatening to drag the 10,000-ton giant to the bottom. Through desperate damage control, the remaining crew managed to shore up bulkheads and correct the list just enough to keep her afloat. But she was dead in the water, a sitting duck. The decision was made. The majority of the surviving crew, over 600 men, were evacuated to escorting destroyers. What remained aboard the Houston was a skeleton crew, a handful of the most critically needed personnel to fight the flooding and maintain bare minimum systems. As the fleet moved on, the Houston was left under tow by the fleet tug USS Pawnee. Their mission: drag the wounded cruiser over, on 500 miles to the major repair base at Ulithi Atoll. It was a slow, perilous procession, constantly under threat from enemy submarines and aircraft. For days, the makeshift convoy crept forward, but the sea itself was a relentless enemy. The temporary patches began to fail. New leaks sprang. The ship's hull, twisted by the torpedo blasts, groaned under the strain. The skeletal crew, exhausted and living in a dark, damp and listing steel tomb, worked around the clock at the pumps. Then disaster struck a second time. On October 16th, a Japanese submarine, lurking on the convoy's route, found its target. A spread of torpedoes raced through the water. One found the Houston again, smashing into her battered stern. The explosion wiped out the remaining steering gear, blew a massive new hole in the hull, and killed or wounded dozens more of the already depleted skeleton crew. The situation seemed finally utterly hopeless. The Pawnee reported the cruiser was sinking. The order was given to prepare to abandon ship. Yet miraculously, the Houston stubbornly remained on the surface. Her compartments, though flooded, contained the water just enough. Captain Behrens, conferring with his senior surviving officers, made an audacious assessment. Abandoning ship in hostile waters was a death sentence for many. They would stay. They would try to make it home. By October 18th, the true scale of the crisis was apparent. The Houston could not be towed. She was taking on more water than her pumps could expel. Her power was gone. Her weapons were useless, and her crew was at the breaking point. Of the skeleton force that had remained after the second torpedoing, only a corps of 4 key officers, all wounded to some degree, were physically capable of command and complex navigation. The ship's navigator, the engineering officer, the communications officer, and 1 junior officer. Supported by perhaps 60 exhausted and injured sailors, these 4 men now faced an impossible task. They were over 600 nautical miles from the nearest safe anchorage at Ulithi. They were aboard a ship that could barely steer, was sinking by the inch, and was a prime target for any passing enemy plane or submarine. The open ocean before them was not a pathway to safety, but a vast, unforgiving desert. Pause. Surrender was not an option. Stopping meant drowning. Theirs was a simple, brutal choice: sail or die. The turning point was not a single moment of combat, but a grinding, hour-by-hour triumph of human ingenuity over mechanical failure. Led by those 4 wounded officers, the crew became a single organism focused on survival. Engineers working in chest-deep, Oily Water managed to rig a makeshift steam line to power one auxiliary pump. Carpenters and metalsmiths fashioned a crude emergency steering system connected directly to the rudder post in the flooded aft compartment. A man would have to stand in that swirling cold water to turn the ship, responding to shouted commands relayed down a chain of sailors. Navigation became an act of faith and skill. With the gyro compass out, the navigator used a magnetic compass, manually correcting for the ship's severe list and the deviation caused by her own battered steel hull. He shot the stars with a sextant whenever clouds permitted, plotting their position on soaked charts. They caught rainwater for drinking. They subsisted on canned rations salvaged from flooded storerooms. For propulsion, they raised what sailors call a jury rig, a makeshift sail constructed from tarpaulins and scrap canvas, hoisted on the mainmast. The mighty USS Houston, once a symbol of American industrial might, was now a wounded beast under sail, inching its way across the Pacific at 3 knots. Every hour she stayed afloat was a victory. Every mile east was a mile closer to salvation. After 8 days of unimaginable strain, on October 27, 1944, a lookout's cry echoed across the silent deck, smoke on the horizon. It was not an enemy, but a U.S. Navy rescue group sent to intercept them. The sight of those friendly ships broke the tension that had sustained the crew. For nearly 2 weeks, under escort, the USS Houston finally crept into Ulithi Lagoon. She was a shocking sight, her stern nearly submerged, her decks encrusted with salt, her crew hollow-eyed and bandaged but standing tall. Pause. The casualty figures tell a harrowing tale. Of her crew, 249 men were killed or missing from the attacks. Nearly every man of the skeleton crew that brought her home was wounded, but they had saved their ship. For their actions, Captain Behrens received the Navy Cross. Numerous other crew members received Silver Stars and Bronze Stars for their valor and skill. The USS Houston was patched up and sent back to the United States for a full year of repairs. She would return to combat, serving with distinction until the end of the war. But her greatest victory was not fought with guns. It was won in the silence between torpedo strikes, in the dark of flooded compartments, by 4 wounded men and their determined crew who refused to let her die. They logged over 600 miles against impossible odds, turning a potential war grave into a testament to the unbreakable human spirit.